Now, since the pioneering London listings by South African companies in the late 1990s, there's been a number of subsequent waves of movement offshore, often precipitated by limited global options for growth and expansion, as well as the lack of access to hard currency. But what will the impact of the lack of economic growth, as well as the political crisis in South Africa, mean for offshore expeditions? Joining us in this discussion is Michele Santangelo, Head of Asset Management at Vunani Private Clients, as well as Finweek contributor Marcia Klein. Michele, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with you. And what is your view of the fact that SAB Miller is set to delist from the LSE? What do you make of this, and what does it mean for us pioneering into the European or other Western markets?
I think it is a bit disappointing that we are going to lose SAB Miller. I mean, it is a stalwart in many people's portfolios, and it's truly one of the success stories. But in terms of the success of other South African businesses in the developed markets and globally, I think we actually are quite successful, and we're continuing to be quite successful. Some of the issues in the domestic economy are amplifying our expansion offshore, but there's actually a lot of companies that are doing very, very well offshore in most markets.
Marcia, perhaps let's get your perspective in our Cape Town studios. We hear about the opportunities to go global, and we do have some major successes in the likes of Steinhoff, Aspen as well, finding growth in emerging market spaces despite Venezuela disappointing them most recently. But talk to us about these opportunities, and more importantly, how they need to mitigate against some of these risks that exist too in the market.
Sorry, I can't hear you. I must talk about the opportunities for these companies.
That's correct, Marcia.
Yes, I think that what we've seen recently is that a lot of these companies have actually done extremely well, specifically in London, where SAB Miller and others are leaving. But if you look, there's been quite a big wave of companies expanding offshore for various reasons. One is opportunities, and one are the limited opportunities in South Africa. Brait just this week announced that it was moving its listing to London. It's had some big acquisitions overseas, New Look and Virgin Active. You've had companies like Steinhoff and Bidcorp making huge strides overseas. So I think that South African companies are making really good use of the opportunities for international expansion.
Mm-hmm. Which other markets would you say are attractive for South African companies to venture into, Marcia?
Well, I think that South African companies have been far more successful in some markets than in others. Europe has certainly been good for South African companies. I think that a lot of them have struggled in the US, and that's probably because there are huge companies there, a lot of competition, very big market. I think that South Africans, as SAB Miller has shown, have been very effective in emerging markets. And I think that if you look at companies like Shoprite and MTN, they have had quite a lot of success in going into the rest of Africa and into other emerging markets.
Michele, let's come back to you in studio. Whilst we celebrate these global achievements, though, we do worry about the local environment back here at home, where growth as well as ongoing market gains do seem to be under significant pressure. Now, recently, the Financial Times has mentioned that we're getting a bit disillusioned by the success factor in South Africa. Would you think that this is a fair assessment? And if so, how then do we need to work towards creating a positive and confident environment for investors in the local arena?
I think they're 100% correct at the moment. I mean, it is a very difficult investment proposal to invest in South Africa at the moment. The economic growth is subpar of what we've been used to. As a commodity and resource-based economy, that cycle still hasn't really turned to the upside just yet. And politically, we keep kicking ourselves in the back every time we think we're getting things right, something else happens. So there are a huge amount of issues, and these always come to the fore. Global investors don't like uncertainty, and as soon as you throw uncertainty in their face, they'll certainly stand back with any sort of investment into that economy, and I think that's the problem we face at the moment. In terms of what we need to do, I think it's actually quite simple in many ways. We need to take what the ratings agencies have given us, and we need to tick their check boxes saying, how do we fix our economy? How do we improve investor confidence? How do we improve our fiscal position? We're running at a number of deficits and spending deficits across the board. So there's a number of things we can do that aren't hugely difficult. They just need the political will to do so. So I think there's a huge amount of things we can do that aren't that difficult.
Mm-hmm. You say they're not difficult, but looking at the current situation, one would argue differently. What exactly would you say are the steps that we need to be taking to make these not so difficult implementations happen?
I think one of the first things to do is look at our state-owned enterprises and see what turmoil they are in. And we should really be in there aggressively cleaning those up with the right management teams coming in. Teams that are very capable and have the right qualifications to balance the books properly. Those are relative. They're difficult to do, but they're simple processes to follow in order to clean things up. So that's the first thing, and we actually need to let our finance minister, Pravin Gordhan, do his job. He is doing a good job in global investors' eyes, and they need to let him do that job correctly and efficiently.
An unfair question to both you, Michele, as well as Marcia in Cape Town, but perhaps let's start off with you here, Michele, just to get your perspective and taking advantage of the fact that you are head of asset management at Vunani. As investors, we can't control where the province stays or goes. We can't control what the Fed does. We can't control all these other elements. But from an investment point of view, we can control where we put our money. What decisions are you making at the moment? Are multinational industrial stocks, which have been the firm favorites, still a place where you're investing at the moment?
I think that the most important part in such uncertain times is to ensure that you are diversified, and especially there's so much uncertainty in developed markets as well as emerging markets. So you probably want to be as diversified as possible across emerging and developed markets, as well as across currencies and companies. So even though there's quite a lot of uncertainty what might happen with the rand and what might happen with Pravin Gordhan, I think you should still have you should definitely have exposure to South Africa, because a lot of our companies are still well valued. You still should have exposure to our multinationals, because you never know what could happen to the rand over time anyway. So certainly there still is an investment case for both sides of the table.
A safe but a decent answer, sticking back to the principles of diversification. Marcia, let's get your views very briefly.
Yes, I agree. I think that for companies and individuals, it's all about diversification. I think that's become more and more important, considering the value of the rand at the moment and where it'll probably go in the future, and just in terms of diversifying your risk. And I think this is what we're seeing more and more companies do, and that's why more and more companies are involved in deal making outside of South Africa. Yet we do live in South Africa and operate our companies in South Africa, and I think that if companies had to give a lot more attention to their local operations, instead of all of their focus being now offshore, that we might also see some sort of improvement in the situation here. So I think that that basically it means having your eggs in all baskets.
Indeed. I was just about to say, going back to the fundamental principles of investing, never putting all your eggs in one basket. A big thank you to both our guests for participating in the conversation today. Michele Santangelo, as well as he's the head of asset management at Vunani Private Clients, and Finweek contributor Marcia Klein.